Okay, so for this video, I have 3 different criteria that I'll be using to show you why Kokomi sucks. But before that, if you enjoy the video, hit that like button, as well as consider subscribing to the channel, and you also may as well hit that shiny bell icon to stay notified for when I upload. But now, onto the video. Okay, so my 3 judging criteria go like this. Number 1 is what kind of unique power does Kokomi bring to the table? How strong is she as an individual? What can she do that other characters can't do? And in general, just what kind of character is she? Like, what does she do, as in a sense? Like, what is her whole character? Number 2, the second criteria is how fun is she? What is the gameplay loop that you're going to be playing when you play Kokomi, roll for Kokomi? If you're a main for Kokomi, what is the gameplay loop like? Will you get bored after 2 to 3 days of playing the character? What's the deal there? Is it very boring, monotonous? What is it? And number 3 is how easy is she to build? What are the bare minimum requirements that you need to make her function as a character? What weapons are best for her in terms of, just getting the bare minimum of strength out? And all that good stuff in terms of constellations, not really talent levels, but mainly constellations and weapons, what you need to make her work. And the difference as well between, let's say, a weak Kokomi, which is, let's say, C1 with a bad weapon, or C0 rather, with a bad weapon, versus a Kokomi that's C6 with a good weapon. And what is the difference there? If it's a massive difference, obviously it's going to be detracting points. If it's a small difference, obviously adding points, and so on and so forth. I should clarify that I will be using the test run to show off all this information, because I will strictly be not rolling for Kokomi, because in my honest opinion, and this part is my opinion, she's a terrible character, but that's still to be decided with this whole video. Now, with those 3 criterias outlined, let's get into number 1. So first thing, we need to understand what Kokomi scales off of. Crit damage and crit rate are off the table. They're essentially redundant. You don't need them for Kokomi in the greater scheme of things. Obviously, if you can min-max it to get like a maximum of 50% crit rate if you funnel all crit rate into her. And it has been proven to work by many YouTubers like Tenor and many others that I haven't seen specifically, but I saw his, and he got it, and you can do that. But for the purpose of this video, where we're building her how she was intended, crit rate and crit damage are off the table. What we are looking at though is the healing for her elemental skill is based on her max HP. During her elemental burst, her normal and charge attack, as well as her elemental skill damage, is increased based on her max HP. And on top of that, her first passive talent increases this percentage that you gain during her elemental burst by 15% of her healing bonus. So in total, she scales off of HP and a bit of healing bonus. In the test run, Kokomi is level 80. She does have the new weapon, which is also at level 80, which gives a 45% HP boost there. In regards to artifacts, she's running 4 set Heart of the Depth, which is 15% Hydro damage bonus, and 30% attack damage and charge attack damage after using elemental skill for 15 seconds, which actually works really well with her. In terms of talent level here, she's rocking 888, which is pretty decent, that's pretty good. And I'm pretty sure all the characters are rocking 888, so that is very good there. Now, in terms of the catalyst and what it brings to her table, it's that healing bonus here that we mentioned, so she'll get a bit of a damage boost from that. Normal attack damage is increased by 1% of the max HP for the character equipping this weapon. And then the last part here is just energy recharge, so not that important in terms of damage output. Now, in terms of the artifacts, actually, you can't see what artifact she's actually rocking, so you can't see the specific stats. But if you go into artifact details, you can see that she's rocking a 35% healing bonus helmet, as well as a 46% hydro damage bonus chalice, which is pretty good. I won't say that that's, optimal, but it's good that they funneled that into her. But for some reason, they thought it was good to give her crit rate and crit damage artifacts, which I was hoping that they wouldn't do that. But I guess they're trying to keep with the theme of nobody has the best artifacts with her, so you'll eventually have some crit rate or crit damage, which is alright, I guess. So with this much funneling into her specific strengths, how well does she actually do? Well, seeing as just using normal attacks without her ceremonial garment, she's hitting for an average of 1.5k per hit, I'd say that's quite disappointing. But if we make use of the 4-set Hydro set, which is the 30% damage bonus to her normal and charge attacks, we make the average bump up to about 1.8k per hit, which is again not the best amount of damage that I've seen. The charge attack isn't much of a boost, going from 2.4 unbuffed to about 2.8 buffed. Her elemental skill summons an AoE heal and does damage. The damage is mediocre at best, dealing 1.8k damage with the 4-set bonus, of 30% damage. Moving on to her burst, where the damage numbers do go up a fair bit. She buffs herself to an extreme, increasing her normal, charged, and skill damage based on her max HP, which is pretty cool. So I'll show her damage with only her burst, doing a 3 attack chain. She averages around 6.1k damage per hit, which again is not phenomenal. I'm gonna be real, it's really not that great. Now let's buff it up with the 4 set 30% damage bonus, and it averages around 7 to 7.1k damage per hit. Her charge attack damage with just the garment, no 4 set bonus, deals 7.9k damage. And with the 4 set bonus, it goes up to 9.9k damage, where this is a bit more respectable, but it's on the charge attack, so stamina will play an issue with that. If you're good with stamina juggling, then by all means that might be good, but for the general player, no one likes doing that. In terms of her elemental skill damage, during her burst, it sits at a steady 4.5k per hit. And so let's put all this info into a bit of a practical scenario. Kokomi's burst duration is 10 seconds, and the set bonus of 30% lasts for about 15 seconds, so they can overlap very nicely. And then within the duration of her garment, she can do about 5 3-hit combos with her normal attacks. And so this is the sequence I've created. Cast her elemental skill for the 30% damage bonus, cast her elemental burst for the garment, proceed to spam normal attacks which average 7.1k per hit, so we can times that by 3, equaling to 21.3k damage a combo. Now times that 21.3 by 5, because we can get 5 combos per garment, and you get a whopping 107.5k damage guaranteed every elemental burst, going into the enemy not being a hydro enemy or they don't have any hydro resistance. Now I'm going to be real with you guys. 107,000 damage, or 107.5 on a level 80 character with level 8 talents and level 80 weapon, and it's all centered around building this character, is a pretty disappointing. Now let's take a few things into consideration. In the test run, she's only level 80 and obviously an 80 weapon. So onto that 107k, if we bump it up to level 90 and a level 90 weapon, we can possibly add 5 to 7k damage if I'm being extremely generous here. I don't exactly know the numbers, but because the artifact itself, the catalyst, my bad, is actually HP percent and is built for her, I'm going to be a bit generous and say we can add about 5 to 7k extra damage if it's both her level 90 and the weapon level 90. So that would bring up the total to about 112 to 113,000 damage per burst with Kokomi. Now obviously this is not including any added bonuses from characters like Bennett or Sarah, so you're not getting that attack increase. Also, there's no elemental shredding from Kazuha or Sucrose, so this is just flat Kokomi damage. Now, to make a hypothetical, we can assume that her damage would rise substantially more with all these potential buffs, but there is one rule that I follow when deciding if a character is good or not, and is, do they do anything by themselves, or do they need to be carried by other support characters? And that's something that I strictly follow. You don't have to follow it. You know, it's just something that I, as a person, follow when deciding if a character is good. And for me, like sub 150k damage on a character who is supposedly is meant to be a healer, but somehow every one of her constellations buffs her damage, and all of her stuff kind of funnels into her being a damage. It's like, what are you doing? But yeah, for me, this is not enough damage. I was expecting a bit better scaling, but to only just barely scratch the 100k mark is quite disappointing. Now, going on to the gameplay loop section, which is the second criteria that I outlined, and the general questions that I ask during this one is, what's the gameplay loop like? Is it a fun gameplay loop? And will you lose interest quickly? Will it have 1 to 2 days of kind of very high interest, very high interactability? And then will it, after those 2 days, just become redundant and boring? Or will it be continuously fun? And there's two characters that I can kind of make a kind of a connection to, or kind of comparison to, is Kokomi is a selfish DPS. If you want to build her as DPS, she's a selfish DPS. That's what she is. The fact that you have to stay 10 seconds as her during her elemental burst instead of you cast it and then you can switch in and out makes her a selfish DPS. the fact that it's 10 seconds, that's a lot of time. They could have easily made that 5 seconds, but it's a bigger buff. Very easily they could have done that. They could have even made it like 4 seconds and then it's just like a massive buff. But they made it 10 seconds of pretty mediocre damage, and that's a pretty big factor going to the selfish DPS. And the character that I'll compare to is Zhao. And this is where the gameplay loop and is it fun comes into play. Zhao is a fun character to play. Who doesn't like to zip zap zop through the enemies left, right and center, dodging, ducking and weaving through attacks during his ultimate, and also jumping into the sky, slamming the ground, like, you know, just being like just this kind of crazy demon of a DPS. Who doesn't like doing that? But you know, obviously his ult is like, I don't know, 10, 14 second duration, something like that. But that's worth it because the gameplay feels good and the damage is good as well. Whilst you go to Kokomi, and whilst the damage can be made good, like the damage is pretty good, it's the gameplay loop is you're sitting there spamming left click or holding right click if you're doing charge attack spamming. I'm like, that doesn't excite me. Like, that really doesn't get me going. That's boring. Like, what am I meant to do with, you know, 10 seconds of I'm just sitting there going, well, like, what is that? Like, no one's having fun doing that. So, she will be enjoyable for the first day or two that you play her at level 90 and 90 weapon and whatnot, and you'll be shredding enemies. But you're going to get bored of her and she's going to leave your team. The same way that over time, Zhao also lost his novelty, but it took a much, much longer period because, well, you're doing more, but it's still the same thing on repeat, right? So that's the gameplay loop. She's cool for the first day or two that you have her at max level, but after that, see you later, Kokomi. And the final criteria here is how accessible is she, which is a very annoying one. But the general questions I ask are, you know, how accessible is she? How easy / hard is she to make work? What's the bare minimum she needs to make herself function as a character, following the procedures of using her actual scaled elements? So we're not going to be obviously talking about the whole getting enough crit rate to bypass her negative 100%. Strictly talking about making use of her way of building and how you would make her function as her own character. And so taking the info from before, she scales off of HP percent. And if we look at all the HP percent catalysts, excluding 3 stars, we're just going to keep it meta. We're going to keep this relevant. We're going to be using 4 stars or 5 stars. We're not going to be dropping down to poverty central where you're using 3 stars still. And there's only 2 HP percent artifacts that are either a 4-star or a 5-star. And that's the new 5-star artifact, because, you know, you need to roll for the new stuff. Or you have one of the OG catalysts, which is the prototype Amber from the base game, which is, you know, you need a catalyst, you need the prototype catalyst to craft it and all that stuff. So you need to be lucky to get that if you want it to refinement 5. But seeing as that's a strictly healing one, doesn't really matter. The prototype Amber is built purely for healing, so obviously you will not receive any other damage bonus from that artifact, or sorry, catalyst, my bad, weapon catalyst. The damage bonus that you will only receive from that is the HP percent that it provides through its substat. Its special ability, or whatever you want to call it, is purely healing, so that is something to take into consideration. Whilst the new catalyst gives overall more HP percent, so obviously scale higher with her HP to damage ratio, whatever you want to call it. It gives that 10% healing bonus, which is obviously going to funnel into her damage, and it gives 1% of max HP as normal attack damage. So overall, the new weapon outshines every other HP catalyst substantially. So this just funnels more into that whole concept of you need this specific weapon to make her work in any way, shape, or form. Very annoying, and makes her less accessible to the general public. You need to be a higher spender, and then, in a sense, making her a worse and worse character. In terms of artifacts, she is debatably easier to build because you can disregard any artifact that has crit rate or crit damage. But the other side of that argument, or the other side of that debate, is that you need to not get 2 of the many, maybe like 9 stats. You need to not get 2 of those stats on the artifacts. The moment you get one of them, the artifact is redundant. So it's arguably, you know, harder or easier, depends on how you look at it, it's arguably easier or harder. Now on to the last part of accessibility, which is going to be in regards to the constellations. Now what I'll be covering here is the difference in power from specific constellations, and just why is it that different? Why is the difference that big? Because I will say this now, that C6 Kokomi, this is just to preface this, C6 Kokomi is probably about like 2 to 3 times stronger than C0 Kokomi. That is saying a lot in terms of power, because I don't think there's any other character, maybe except Hu Tao, that's something like that. But Hu Tao's is a very situational and circumstantial power buff. But Kokomi, I'd say C6 compared to C0 is about a 2 to 3 times power increase. Now going into what constellations are actually that strong, it's number 1, 4, and 6. These are the massive power boosts. Obviously 3 and 5 are talent boosts, so that will naturally provide a damage boost. But number 1 here, this one's crazy. C1 is something... Hey guys, before we continue, I do realize that my cam was actually in the way of the constellations. It's not in the way by a massive margin. You can read most of what it does, but in a sense I also do explain the constellation itself, so I do apologize on that behalf. Actually, I should probably preface this all by saying that if you don't want Kokomi, or if you're debating with yourself, like thinking about getting her as a character, don't do it. If you are remotely hesitant to get her, even in the very slightest bit, do not get her. She is not worth it. Do not even try to get her if you are remotely hesitant. If you are someone who wants the character and you are not taking no for an answer or whatever, you just want her 100%, then by all means get her. And then if you're wanting to build her strongly and whatnot, C1 is like almost a bare minimum. C1 is the bare minimum at this point, because here's what it does. The final hit of your normal attack chain, which is the after you do the kind of loop-de-loop kind of thing, you unleash a fish, dealing 30% of your max HP as hydro damage. Here's the thing, the reason this is so strong and ridiculously dumb that it's a constellation is that if this doesn't have an internal cooldown, then this is broken. If this does not have an internal cooldown, this is the most broken constellation. Maybe, okay, I shouldn't say the most broken. You know, there are a lot more broken ones out there, to be quite frank with you all. But this is a super strong C1. So if you're planning on building Kokomi in any way, if you really want the character, get C1 minimum. Because if this doesn't have an internal cooldown, it is broken. Because mathematically, let's do the maths here. 30% of the test run 30k HP is 10k damage minimum that you are doing as hydro damage. Obviously, this is not taking into consideration hydro reses, using it against actual hydro enemies, shields and whatnot. Obviously, that's not taking into consideration that. But just as a benchmark bit of damage, being 10k with the test run, and I'll use, I think I remember seeing Tenor in his stream. Obviously, he got Kokomi and he showed it off a bit. But I remember my brother telling me that it was, I think he got up to her about 55k or 55k HP, sorry. Or 50k-ish HP, I can't quite remember what I heard. But 30% of 50k is a lot of damage. Guaranteed after the final hit. That's a lot. That's a lot. So that's one thing about accessibility. She gains such a big power boost from her C1. But by the way, she's a healer. Now, going on to her C4, this again is another accessibility thing. See, she gains such a big power boost from her C4. Now, obviously, going on to if you're a big spender or if you want Kokomi, if you're willing to put in a bit more money, you know, give her a few more dollary dues, then C4 is a good option. C2, by the way, is garbage. C4, though, pretty good. She gains a 10% attack speed boost during her garment. One of the few attack speed boosting capabilities in the game. And also, obviously, there's a bit of energy restoration, feeding into that mentality of a selfish DPS. This is just feeding that selfish DPS mentality where she restores her own. Because here, I'm pointing at my screen with my own finger. You guys can't see it, but it's for her. If it was for the team, then sure, that would be cool. But because it's for her, it's feeding to that selfish DPS kind of vibe. But again, this is another one of those strong ones. Now, if you're already at C4 and you're happy with it, by all means stay there. But if you even slightly consider going higher than that, by all means go to C6. Because it's busted again. You get a 40% Hydra damage boost for 4 seconds when her normal or charge attack heals. Or, you know, this is the great wording here. This is the great amazingness of this constellation is when your attacks heal or would have healed any party member with 80% more HP. So just healing a character or possibly healing a character gives you a 40% Hydra damage bonus. This is cracked. Now, that's not the point of this segment. This is not to highlight how strong she can be at C6. This segment is to highlight the fact that she gains such power from her constellations comparatively to her C0. Her C0 is nothing compared to her C6. And I think that's saying something about the creation of a character. Because whilst I agree that power should be hidden behind constellations, your character shouldn't double to triple in power from constellations, which is what I feel will happen. Now, I should personally clarify that I haven't seen any C6 constellation, C6 gameplay of Kokomi. I haven't seen any. I'm not interested in the character in any way. But I like when I do eventually see some, I do feel it will be monstrous DPS. It might not be monstrous damage per hit, like, you know, so it won't be like 2 million damage or 200 damage per hit, but it will be 20k per hit, 30k per hit, and it will be happening per second or whatever. It will just be crazy. But the fact that it's hidden behind pretty much C1 is like a very big one. C4 elevates C1 because the frequency of the final hits elevates, and then C6 will just flat out boost everything. That is the point of this segment in the video. Is that C0, if you're going for Kokomi, you might as well go for C6 Kokomi because the comparison is day and night. The difference is day and night. And that's why Kokomi sucks and you can't change my mind. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video and also consider subscribing down below. Also, remember, there's a shiny bell there with your name on it. Ring it so you can be notified when I upload videos next. And also, consider commenting down below. Maybe you could change my mind. Maybe. Probably not, though. But maybe. But probably also not. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.